The wagon creaked and groaned as it climbed the narrow track toward the mountains, each turn of its wheels biting into the frosted earth. Clara May Bennett sat on the hard plank seat beside her father, hands clasped in her lap, fingers numb from the cold that seeped even through her threadbare glove. She had not spoken since they left the ranch before dawn, neither had he. The silence between them was a wall, thick and impenetrable, built not in a day but over years of disappointment and unspoken judgments. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke drifting from some far-off chimney, and the sky above them was the pale, brittle blue of winter that has no intention of yielding to spring. She knew this was not a journey toward kin or comfort. She knew because of the way her father's jaw clenched each time the wagon hit a rut, because of the set of his shoulders that had nothing of warmth in it. This was not mercy. This was a sentence. The life she had once carried inside her was gone weeks ago, lost in the dim light of her small bedroom with no one but her mother's trembling hands to hold her through the pain. The whispers that followed in town, however, cared nothing for truth. To them, Clara May Bennett had been ruined, and worse, she had been foolish enough to let it show. Luke Carver, his name she tried not to think, was nowhere to be found. It was easier for the town to think she'd brought shame upon herself, easier for her father to agree. When the wagon crested a rise, she saw it, a cabin of rough-hewn logs set against the dark sweep of pines, smoke curling slow from its chimney. No fence, no barn, just the mountain behind it like a great, silent guardian. A tall figure stood near the chopping block, his axe paused mid-air. He wore a coat darkened by years of weather, his beard thick with streaks of gray. Even from the wagon, Clara could feel the steadiness of his gaze. Her father brought the team to a halt, the horses steaming in the cold. Without looking at her, he climbed down, boots crunching in the frost. She followed, her legs stiff, her heart heavy in her chest. "This here's Clara," her father said, his voice carrying the flat tone of a transaction rather than an introduction. "She's yours to keep, Elias. We'll call it payment for them trapping rights you wanted." Elias Boone lowered the axe, the blade settling into the block. He didn't move forward, didn't smile or offer his hand. He just looked at her, as if weighing not her worth, but her endurance. His eyes, a pale, weathered blue, betrayed nothing more than observation. "She can work," Silas added. "Knows her way around chores." Elias gave a slow nod. "Reckon that'll do." That was all. No questions, no comment on her presence. Her father turned without another word and climbed back into the wagon. She stood frozen as the wheels began to roll again, the creak and groan fading into the trees. He never looked back. Elias gestured toward the cabin. "You'll want to get out of the cold." His voice was deep, unhurried, but carried no invitation beyond necessity. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and dried sage. The space was spare. A small table, a few mismatched chairs, shelves lined with jars of dried goods, a rifle propped in the corner. There was no softness here, no place that looked like it belonged to a woman. He pointed toward a narrow door at the back. "That's yours. Keep the fire fed in there, or it'll freeze over by morning." She stepped into the small room, a bed against the wall, a chest for her things, though she carried little more than the clothes she wore. The single window was rimmed with frost, letting in a thin wash of light. She set her small satchel down, her fingers lingering on the worn strap, before turning back to the main room. Elias had already gone outside. That night, the wind howled through the pines, rattling the shutters. She lay in the narrow bed, eyes open to the dark, listening to the crackle of the fire in the other room. Her thoughts ran circles, of her mother's silence when her father spoke, of the smirks from town women who pretended sympathy, of Luke's easy smile that had vanished like smoke. She pulled the blanket tighter, willing the cold from her bones. The morning came with brittle light. She rose early, found Elias already gone, his boots missing from beside the door. A note sat on the table: "Boil water. Keep the fire." His handwriting was neat, unexpected. She went about the task, awkward at first, unsure where he kept the tinder or how much wood the stove would take before it roared too loud. By mid-morning, she heard the door open. He stepped in carrying a bundle of kindling under one arm. Without a word, he set it down and crossed the room to place something by her door. A pair of boots, scuffed, the leather cracked but sturdy. They were far too large, but the lining inside looked warm. "I can manage," she said quickly, not sure why she was refusing. "Snow's coming," was all he replied, turning away. The days fell into a rhythm she hadn't expected. He spoke little, and when he did, it was about work. How to stack wood so it dried faster, which herbs to use for cooking, where the snow drifted deepest along the path to the creek. She learned to move quietly in his space, not from fear, but because silence seemed to be the language of this place. On the fourth evening, as she reached to add wood to the stove, her sleeve caught and she lost her grip. The log shifted, sending a burst of sparks that kissed her bare wrist. She hissed and drew back. Elias was beside her in an instant, pulling a clean cloth from the shelf, dipping it in cool water. "Hold still," he said, his voice even but softer than before. His hands were rough, the calluses catching slightly on her skin, but his touch was careful. He wrapped the burn in the damp cloth, tying it with a knot that held firm but not tight. He didn't meet her eyes, didn't remark on the tears she didn't mean to shed. When he stepped back, she noticed the faint crease between his brows, as though her pain was a thing he would rather see gone. She murmured a thanks, barely above a whisper, and he nodded once before tending to the fire himself. Later, when he left for the woods again, she stepped outside. The air was sharp, the world quiet but for the soft hiss of falling snow. The mountains rose around her, immense and unmoving, their slopes dusted in white. She realized she was alone in a way she had never been before, without her father's shadow, without the town's eyes. It was not freedom, not yet, but it was the absence of judgment, and that felt like something worth holding on to. She tilted her face upward, letting the snow settle on her skin. For the first time in weeks, she let her shoulders drop, the weight of shame easing if only for the moment. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Elias was cutting wood, and though she could not see him, the knowledge of his presence, silent, steady, was enough to keep the cold from feeling quite so deep. The snow had begun to thin in the weeks that followed, the pale crust breaking to reveal the dark, damp earth beneath. Clara had learned the sounds of this place, the groan of trees in the wind, the low rush of the creek, the crunch of Elias's boots when he returned from the woods. They moved in a quiet rhythm now, speaking when needed, their words measured but never unkind. Yet there was still something in the air between them, like a bridge half built, each waiting for the other to take the next step. One morning, Elias came in from the cold with his coat dusted in frost. "We're going to town," he said simply, setting a bundle of pelts on the table. Clara looked up from the bread dough she was kneading, her hands stilled mid-press. She had not set foot in town since her father left her here. The thought made her stomach tighten. "We'll need flour, lamp oil. You can choose what else you want," he added, his tone practical, leaving no room for argument. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron, but the unease curled tight in her chest. The wagon jolted over the frozen ruts of the road, the air smelling faintly of thaw and wet pine. Elias drove without hurry, the horse's breath streaming into the morning light. Clara kept her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the mountains bled into rolling hills, the nearer they came to the cluster of buildings that marked the town. She could already feel the weight of eyes she had not yet met. They pulled up outside the general store, and Elias helped her down, his hand warm through her glove. She stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards under her feet tugging at memories she'd rather leave buried. The shop smelled of leather, coffee beans, and dry wood, a scent that once comforted her but now felt sharp with warning. Conversations hushed as they entered. A woman near the bolts of cloth turned her head, eyes flicking from Clara to Elias and back again. From behind the counter, Mrs. Weller looked up, her gaze catching like a fishhook. "Well," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "So this is where you ended up, Clara May Bennett." The words were honeyed in tone but laced with iron, and they stopped Clara in her tracks. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, the air in the store pressing heavy around her. No one spoke outright, but the whispers were there, coiled in every glance. Elias stepped forward, placing himself just enough between her and the others that their eyes had to go through him first. He said nothing, didn't even look at them, only began unloading the pelts onto the counter for weighing. His presence alone was enough to scatter some of the stares, though not all. Clara kept her chin low, helped gather the goods, and followed him back to the wagon as quickly as she could. The wind outside felt cleaner, even if it was cold enough to sting. The ride home was quiet. Elias didn't ask if she was all right, didn't speak of the store, but his hand tightened on the reins in a way that told her he had noticed more than he would say. An hour from the cabin, the wagon lurched sharply as one wheel caught in a deep rut near the frozen creek. The sudden jolt sent the bundle of flour sliding toward the edge. Elias cursed under his breath, climbing down to check the wheel. Clara followed, the cold biting through her boot. The wheel was stuck deep, the ice-slick mud holding it fast. Elias worked to pry it free, but as the wood shifted, a loosened log from the bank above slid toward the water, threatening to catch the wagon in its pull. Without thinking, Clara plunged into the shallows, boots filling instantly with freezing water. She shoved at the log, her hands going numb, but it shifted just enough to drift downstream. Elias's voice cut through the roar in her ears. "Get out of there!" He hauled her to the bank, his grip like iron. She was shaking, breath coming in ragged bursts, the icy weight of her clothes clinging to her. Without hesitation, he stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling it close. "Fool thing to do," he said, but there was no bite in it, only a tightness that sounded almost like fear. She looked up at him, surprised to see the tension in his jaw, the faint tremor in his hands as he steadied her. By the time they reached the cabin, the snow had begun again, soft flakes catching in her damp hair. Elias guided her to the chair nearest the fire, fetched a blanket, and set a steaming mug in her hands. The warmth seeped into her fingers, chasing the cold from her bones. "You didn't have to," she began, but he shook his head. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," he said, his gaze fixed on the flames. Then, after a pause, "You're not what they say." The words were quiet, yet they landed with the weight of something long needed. Clara swallowed, feeling the heat rise in her throat. "Neither are you," she said. Their eyes met then, unhurried, holding steady in the flicker of the firelight. It was not the look of people who had exchanged promises or spoken of futures, but the understanding of two who had weathered storms and found in each other a harbor they had not sought yet could not deny. The days that followed carried a new stillness, not of distance but of comfort. Elias began leaving small things for her to find, a carved hair comb, its surface smoothed by patient work, a sprig of pine left on her windowsill, fragrant in the cold. She mended his coat where the seams had given, her stitches neat, almost invisible. Neither spoke of these exchanges, yet they lived in them as much as in their words. She caught herself humming one afternoon while kneading dough, the sound soft but certain. Elias, working by the doorway, looked up. He didn't comment, only kept his tools moving, but his shadow stretched long across the floor toward her. In town, they might still whisper, might still cast sidelong glances, and speak her name like it carried a stain. But here, within these walls and under these mountains, they had made their own truth, one built not on claim or debt, but on the quiet, deliberate choice to treat each other with care in a world that too often forgot how. One evening, as the snow fell thick against the windows, Clara stepped outside. The world was hushed, the sky a low, silver weight. She thought of the girl she had been when her father left her here, small, hollowed by shame, bracing always for the next blow. That girl was still inside her, but now she stood beside another self, one shaped by the steady rhythm of work, the kindness of unspoken gestures, the strange freedom found in the company of a man who asked nothing yet gave without measure. When she went back inside, Elias was tending the fire. He glanced up briefly, and in that brief glance she felt the quiet certainty that whatever storms came, they would weather them together, not with grand vows or easy words, but with the same silent understanding that had carried them this far. The snow hissed against the roof, the fire crackled, and in the stillness between them lay something that felt very much like a beginning.